Upon request after request on not just my channel, but virtually every channel when discussing an akatsuki list where Hidan kind of just gets beaten off start in a minute of talking, the concept of what if Hidan fought each Jonin, or what if Hidan ran the Jonin gauntlet, will always be a topic to come about in every comment section. So today I'm finally going to revisit Hidan in a more close and positive lens to truly determine which Jonin Hidan could possibly be and why he's not actually that fodder. It's just the people he gets paired against are maybe a little too strong. Now, even though the title of Jonin is extremely rare, we don't have all that much knowledge on several. These being like, there's several that are like Isago of the Sand, Reki of the Sand, Shito of the Leaf, Insui of the Leaf, Santa of the Leaf, and since you probably haven't recognized a single one I just named, you get the point. Despite being rare, there are just some we don't see, so I've tried to gather 10 where I think there isn't a definitive answer due to comparative measures being rather ambiguous, and ones I think a direct conclusion could be drawn upon. For the 5 ambiguous and probably weaker level, we have Shizune, Shee, Choza, Neji, and Kurenai. And then for the 5 higher tier combatants, which will be much more nuanced and difficult for Hidan, we have Yamato, Darui, Might Guy, Kakashi, and then Killer B. So with these 10 combatants, those will be the 2 tiers of sorts, and they are in an order of inclination, as in they are pretty close to one another, but from first to last, there is a gradual increase in power. So yeah, each Jonin will face Hidan in Asuma's position to protect Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino, except neither Kakuzu or the other shinobi can intervene. So yeah, the only knowledge will be how they operate in pairs and are extremely dangerous. And with that, apologies for the longer-winded intro, let's begin with just how strong Hidan really is. So Hidan is a character where many people will sort of gloss over his capabilities, in part to how he claims himself as having the worst aim and slowest level of combat in the entire akatsuki. And since this is an extremely agreed upon level, no one really analyzes the context of that statement, and I think it definitely adds a lot, as when Hidan actually notes this, he and Kakuzu are trying to lure Yugito back to them by virtually any means necessary, as she is running away, in which many things are said, such as Hidan stating that, and then Kakuzu noting how he won't help him despite usually being the doer, and then Kakuzu tells Hidan to be careful so he doesn't die, when in 10 chapters later, Hidan states he can't die. So there's clearly lying going on to lure Yugito, and this is further emphasized by Hidan laughing later and calling himself a trapped mouse after weaving her fireball. So Hidan isn't the slowest and doesn't have the worst aim in the akatsuki by virtue of this statement. I mean, clearly, even when Asuma approaches Hidan to attempt and off-guard him, an extremely casual Hidan is able to notice Asuma mid-shuriken throw and sit up, grab his cord, and swing his scythe in 3 different directions to accurately hit all of them and nearly slice Asuma in half, all whilst nearly off guard with one hand. So him having the worst aim just probably isn't true. And I mean, on 2 separate occasions, one, of being upside down in the air, either flipping or just dodging the shadow paralysis, Hidan can throw accurate shots at Asuma. So I mean, Hidan's aim definitely isn't the worst, and if it was, he's probably just lying, or the standard of measure at which he's saying it's the worst by is just ridiculously high. And to further the initial, Kakuzu tries to do the same tactic, later against the other Jonin, saying, "Just be careful, Hidan, or you'll die." And Hidan kind of just shuts it down. So when you take the Yugito encounter, also analyze the Asuma encounter to fully understand the context of Hidan and Kakuzu's strategies. So with this basis, he may not even be the slowest either, and could still be above potentially Konan and even Sasori, depending on your interpretation of his relativity to Kakuzu, which we'll touch on in a minute. But for Asuma, he's a shinobi capable of being compared to Kakashi, Konoha's top Jonin, with this in the 4 data book stating how his true strength is close to Kakashi, and in potentially even, and when no one is actually greater than Asuma in close quarters combat with his charged blades, which is pretty telling for Hidan, as he's able to bait Asuma with his blade and then blitz him with his scythe casually, even with Asuma's teammates yelling for him to dodge, even forcing him to use his burning ash jutsu, which could be a specialty for him since it is a fire style jutsu, and the Sarutobi clan specializes in those, and this jutsu actually requires flint in one of your molars, your big tooth in the back, which is why he's the only listed trusted user for it. So this is pretty telling, and the data book also implies it may have even hurt Izumo and Kotetsu to Jonin. So Hidan is likely just above Asuma, even pressuring him into these sorts of jutsus, and then of course just killing him as well. This all being pretty casual for Hidan, as the only time he was ever caught was when under shadow paralysis, which even the chapter 325 synopsis statement does mention how Hidan wasn't actually serious yet. So the whole fight was both an unserious Kakuzu and Hidan. Hidan being this level either isn't really inconsistent by any means when you account for how he can react to Kakuzu and run alongside him, and react to Yugito similarly to Kakuzu and keep Kakashi on the back foot. This would be the same Kakashi who was just slightly above Asuma, which depending on your interpretation of him would, if he is fully able to pressure Kakashi, then Hidan could actually be just of a far greater level than Asuma and then just under Kakashi, which is pretty impressive, and it keeps him at the peak Jonin tier. And for those who don't know, Konoha Jonin are almost always stronger by virtue of Konoha being the strongest village with the exception of Kumo, and this is made evident when you consider like Baki showings against opponents who are weaker. Konoha Shinobi do similarly against this Baki, who is Suna's strongest Jonin. So by all means, Hidan is probably just low in Kakashi tier and then above Asuma, and this could be viewed as generous, but for the sake of discussion we can just go with this as it's not outlandish by any means. Now, as I'm sure you would agree with, Hidan's physical ability or his raw strength isn't whatever gives him his reputation, but rather his immortality and ritual. And while the ritual is very crazy, his immortality or just his immortal body is probably more impressive just due to how it allows for implementation of so many reckless strategies or catching the opponent off guard, such as how he caught Asuma's whole squad off guard when he got shadow paralyzed and then the 2 spears through his torso and simply just didn't care. So imagine if he wasn't paralyzed and then you have a disaster waiting. So this doesn't mean he can just tank any attack, and while this is true, even if he gets your blood, there is always still ways of getting around this, or just certain types of damage, like how Asuma's shuriken can cut Hidan's ear and it never really heals back. So you could make a case for Hidan's strength that, whenever he tanks Kakuzu's Wind Heart, Hidan might actually just be that crazy, as he doesn't have like an immortal healing factor, it's just it will not kill him. And he can get the blood of combatants as well, and they of course won't have any idea of the ritual, and this being just how deadly it actually is. And with all this out of the way, let's just do Hidan some justice by putting him against Shizune, Tsunade's aide. But before we do that though, please consider liking the video or subscribing, as it does help me out a ton, and I certainly think you would learn something or just benefit out of the enjoyment if you did. So by all means, maybe check out another video or subscribe, do your boy a favor. Kicking the first one off quickly, it's Shizune, and to absolutely no one's surprise, she gets beaten up pretty badly by Hidan. I never thought I'd say that. As for one of her medical prowess and knowledge is what actually gives her her reputation, being second only to Tsunade in the whole world, but her actual combat ability is just pretty lacking, and we don't really have any feasible showings to suggest she could be faster than Asuma or weave the scythe to not get her blood taken, which is virtually a given in this fight, and just, means that Hidan should beat her up pretty easily. No one's probably going to contend this. Following her up, we have one much more interesting, Shee, the 4th Raikage's guard, and while he is a guard, comparing him to Darui is probably just not that good for Shee, as while yes, it is taking into account his battle ability, Darui is the right hand due to his ability and power and having the mark of the 3rd and beating Kinkaku and Ginkaku. Shee kind of isn't, and he's a little different. Shee isn't near as combat effective and specializes in genjutsu and medical jutsu, as shown as he could heal the Raikage, and he could use his flash pillar genjutsu against Sasuke in the summit, being able to combo after Darui. However, due to the sequence of that, there isn't a real way to assert Shee around A or Darui here, and even his experience isn't anything to be impressed at, considering he has never been in a war prior to the 4th Great War. So Hidan should be able to make pretty quick work of Shee. At best, Shee could flash pillar Hidan, but for him to even do this, it would require, another combo attack for this to be effective during, whenever he's like flashbanged. So he could probably just tank it and then bully Shee via either cutting his head off or just blitzing him around with his agility, even parrying Asuma off, one of Konoha's top Jonin, alongside Kakashi, who literally specializes in these close quarters encounters. So when you consider how the Cloud and Konoha Jonin are pretty similar in might, and this Shee is not really the top of the Jonin, Hidan is still able to move alongside Sharingan Kakashi, who is, and while you could say he is fatigued, I think his fatigue still wouldn't be anything to really write down, as he still was able to use Kamui or confident in doing such and actually did continue to fight. So Hidan beats up Shee pretty badly. Following Shee with Choza, the first piece to establish would be that Hidan is just faster and stronger by virtue of scaling to higher Konoha Jonin, but the way he'd interact with the expansion jutsu and other Akamichi related jutsu is sort of ambiguous, as Hidan doesn't ever really interact with Choji, to be honest, so we can't really include like the pain arc version, which is still inferior to Kakashi, so it doesn't matter. Hidan's win cons here are basically just abuse his immortality and then get the blood and kill him, whereas Choza's win cons would be questionable at best. Maybe squish him? Well, Hidan is faster, so I do want to give something to Choza similarly to this, tier in Jonin, but they really just don't stack up to Hidan or Asuma, who, Hidan skills above, as Kakuzu notes in the war, that Asuma and Dan are the golden assets, whereas Choza isn't. However, the next ones definitely do more than the others, at least beginning with Neji. And while it may seem like Neji has just no showings, that's kind of true, but his showings are far more demonstrable than any of the other Jonins so far. As we can see, he's able to outpace Rock Lee and Tintin in the fight against 30% Kisame, reacting to the shockwave at the same time and being able to capitalize on them and breaking them out of the water prison, showing his sort of leadership style for Tintin and Lee, which is very crucial as base Rock Lee is able to combo attack with base Might Guy, such as how Lee can combo and kick with him in the war, still being a Chunin, also intercepting Kisame to save Guy in this fight. So while this does hold some ambiguity, you can actually make a pretty solid case for Neji being able to beat Hidan if you think he's close to base Guy, who would then be a rival to base Kakashi, and then this Kakashi, he could use the Sharingan and Raikiri, who then Guy could equal with the 6th gate, and this is pretty impressive. As I mentioned, Hidan can keep pace and move alongside Kakashi and keep his pace still, this being the same Kakashi whom by this point in the fight was trying to speed it up and end it. So coupling that with how he's just far above Asuma, as Asuma said himself, and just demonstrably without even being serious, you then have a pretty good case for Hidan being, not only, slightly faster, but also, or just as fast as Neji. You also can just take this interpretation for his relativity to Guy. Now, when you do compare their two styles, it does seem to favor Hidan due to how Neji almost always fights in close quarters taijutsu with his 64 palms or rotation, and Hidan was able to keep Asuma at bay with his scythe, killing him hastily. This would be the same for Neji as well, as even in this like close quarters fight, he was still trying to engage Hidan in it, but simply just couldn't ever engage Hidan, as Hidan was forcing Asuma in a level of distance with his scythe. And considering Asuma's reputation in close quarters being nearly unmatched by any Jonin in part 1, to say that Neji would just be greater in close quarters combat due to his taijutsu and Byakugan would probably be a bit disingenuous. Speaking of which, Neji's Byakugan is implied in the databook to be honed to its utmost potential, despite Takumo Hyuga being stated to have the sharpest Byakugan of all the Hyuga, so maybe him and Neji are equals, or the squad in the war was just wrong. So this Byakugan does allow him to not get caught off guard as easily as Asuma did, such as when Hidan tossed a diversionary blade for him to block, allowing him to then swing the scythe from a horizontal angle to pierce straight into his face, despite the Tokubetsu Jonin screaming for him to dodge it. So it could just be a testament to it for, his speed. This also just being, again, an unserious Hidan who's matching stronger opponents later. So considering this, I think Neji has a pretty interesting matchup, since they could be relative in combat speed. Hidan just still has a hardcore advantage and can keep Neji at a distance until he can kill him, and he can, as he did this with a stronger opponent who would probably be better in these up close encounters, and Neji's Byakugan would allow him to not get caught by far more exponential attacks that are like spinning around and stuff, but Hidan still probably just wins due to the scenario presented. So this fight is definitely the closest of this tier, but Hidan probably still wins. Following Neji is another one with a solid chance of winning, but is far more ambiguous, and that's Kurenai. And while Kurenai doesn't have any top tier showings, her lore implications are very much noteworthy, with it being implied that she could stand alongside the other Jonin as rivals, this being in credit to her genjutsu and intelligence, which is always talked about for Kurenai. And yes, her genjutsu, okay, we know, okay, yes, she got clowned by Itachi, but bro, it's Itachi, and he's literally the Sharingan master, like he's the Sharingan guy, and even having the arguably strongest genjutsu in his possession. But what if I told you you may have misinterpreted that encounter, as the first data book mentions how she engaged in an equal genjutsu battle with Itachi using her demonic illusion, either, with it also just elaborating further with her overturning it and nullifying it in a crucial moment. But this databook page also has a lot of other critical pieces of information, such as how, if you look at her proportional statistic chart, her speed, taijutsu, ninjutsu are all equal to her intelligence, which is actually what's noted to catch her opponent, sort of alluding to the idea that while her genjutsu is very crazy and is her peak, her taijutsu, speed, and ninjutsu are only one level below that, and probably hint to more of her Jonin status, probably being closer to Asuma than what you could think. But still, Hidan is just blatantly above Asuma, so we have a pretty odd case for Hidan. Could Hidan slice up and beat Kurenai, or at least draw blood from Kurenai before she catches him in a genjutsu? And to be honest, it's kind of debatable when you consider his arrogance and personality and how it's always entering into battles, especially in this very battle. So, Hidan, he didn't even enter the fight, fully serious. So I actually do think, Kurenai unironically could capitalize on this and potentially win. But if not, Hidan certainly beats her pretty handily, probably worse than Asuma, making this pretty reliant on your interpretation if she could ever pull this off or not, meaning that I'd probably give a win to Kurenai 5 or 6 out of 10 times versus Hidan. And yeah, so for the lower 5, I think I just gave Hidan more wins than I've ever given him in my whole YouTube career. Now, cracking into the formidable 5, that sounds like a superhero team, we can begin with Yamato, the potential equal to Kakashi and Naruto's teacher for a brief period of time. But is Yamato actually as strong as this reputation implies? And firstly, to address Kakashi noting how Yamato is the only junior he could acknowledge as an equal, is likely just Kakashi sweet-talking Yamato end up paying for the meal, as even Naruto jokes about this, upon seeing it, as he's like, he could sweet-talk anyone. But there is an argument for truth being in his sweet talking, since he isn't lying to Naruto when he says Naruto is the only shinobi to be able to actually surpass Minato, and we do know the third data book corroborates this objectively. However, the issue is how the scene isn't denoted to have the same atmosphere as when he's sweet talking, Yamato as here when he's sweet talking Naruto, such as how this charm glint doesn't appear, and the reaction wasn't satirical. So the argument certainly can be there, but I just would never make it. Still, saying that he's close to Kakashi isn't preposterous by any means necessary, as we still know that Sharingan Kakashi runs at Kakuzu with arms out to the side, and we aren't really sure of when he uses the Raikiri in Yamato's wood style, it kind of just reaches and wraps around Kakuzu before Kakashi can get there, and then Kakashi cuts the arm off. So this is pretty telling for Yamato's wood style and its potency, outspeeding this disheveled Kakashi, which could hold consistent with how the databook talks about him and Kakashi crossing blades during the Anbu days, with Yamato being called the top of the Anbu by the databooks, likely being right under or next to Kakashi, due to Kakashi's legendary reputation in the Anbu and his rank of captain within it. So coupled with him, in Kakashi's narrative, a temporary replacement, which Yamato notes as big shoes to fill, which kind of tracks with other implications for Yamato just being slightly below Kakashi, such as Guy calling him, Konoha's top jutsu master, or both the fan book and first data book calling him the strongest Jonin in Konoha, placing him again above Yamato by some measure of standard. And it is probably just true that him and Kakashi are close in power, or at least base Kakashi by this point in the series, which might prove detrimental for Hidan, at least here, due to how Yamato could react to and use the wood style to hit Kakuzu before Kakashi, this being the same Kakashi that moved equally with Hidan. So the wood style likely could just catch Hidan in several different ways, making Hidan's job much harder. Now, there is a way that Hidan gets this blood. Yes, Hidan could actually just weave around the wood and eventually just catch him, with the scythe to then perform the ritual. However, he could still use other strategies like the false projectile and whatnot to then kind of catch Yamato lacking, which is all it takes in this fight. And all it takes is a single drop of blood for him to, capitalize on catching Yamato lacking. And this Yamato is fully unaware of Hidan's abilities, and this paints a picture of just how close this fight can be. And that's sort of a benefit for both characters, as while Yamato has far more demonstrable feats and lore implications, and is more ambiguous as a Jonin, it's still ambiguous enough to where they both have win cons and could win. So for Yamato, he probably actually could win due to how I see him engaging this fight as cautious as he does against the Akatsuki members, which will obviously just be coupled with how Hidan has a problem of not being serious when he should be. And if you remember, the goal of Team Asuma was to capture one and kill the other, so capturing Hidan may grant him some bonus points, if you want to say that, and the wood style would just be the perfect way to bind him, maybe even catch him off guard by merging with a wood structure to appear behind him like a tree or something, and then just engage him and taijutsu where he can catch him then. So they would also probably just be comparable in a taijutsu scuffle. So for Yamato, in conclusion, I would say he actually comes out on top like 6-7 out of 10 times. Moving on to Darui, Shee's superior and the Raikage's right-hand man, and this Darui is a Jonin strong enough to be granted the mark of the third Raikage, which is basically like assigned to be able to use the black lightning, which he used actually to take out several white Zetsu, which is pretty telling and is likely just a far step up from his basic emotion wave, which is able to shock 5 Kage summit Sasuke, pushing him back away from the Raikage, which he actually used in combination with his basic water wall, this being the same Sasuke who could keep up with and move on par with the version 1 Raikage, a character who's stated to be at the top of the world alongside the other Kage for the chapter 456 synopsis statement, which this level for Darui actually is very consistent, as him and the version 1 Raikage are able to swing their arms down at the same speed and completely combo together, and Jugo was also capable of reacting to the Raikage, and Darui was able to actually outspeed and react and parry off Suigetsu, Jugo's rival. And I mean, he literally is just a Raikage's aid, like he should be around a V1 level and just not close to the V2 level, which from what we know, this places Darui on a greater level in this early series than the early series Yamato, which is a pretty big step up for Hidan, meaning that Darui is, he's at least faster than Hidan generally, and that shouldn't be a debate, which makes this much more difficult when you consider Darui's extremely dangerous abilities that he uses from a distance that don't really require him to engage in that very close proximity that Hidan needs, such as how he comboed his lightning and water styles to push Sasuke back, and his black lightning, and most importantly, his light speed laser circus that fires out water particles and uses lightning infusion to reflect off the water for them to then attack at light speed. And by the nature of its pattern, it is literally meant to go around defenses, such as how it maneuvered around Samui to then slam Ginkaku, and even cracking his arm as well, which is pretty consistent as it also blitzes Kinkaku, the stronger of the two, and to remind you and further solidify his ranking along the Raikage. These two enemies were so strong that the Raikage thought he needed to go down there himself and beat them up, yet Darui handled them fairly well. So even if Hidan is going to attempt to, maybe defend with this scythe, it's basically just game over for Hidan, as Darui would just blitz him with the laser circuits, which would probably just be, what he'd do after pressuring him and pushing him back with his numerous other water style and lightning style jutsu, as Hidan just isn't fast enough or strong enough to do anything in return. And considering even though Hidan could be close to Kakuzu, who is still the superior, he would actually imply himself to be of a lesser caliber than Kinkaku in terms of their, shogi rankings. So Darui is probably going to beat up Hidan like 8 to 10 times out of 10. And for the next two, Might Guy, followed up by Kakashi, these two can basically be summed up in the same vein, considering how they are virtually relative and nearly equal throughout the series, with Might Guy being called the most dedicated shinobi ever in the third data book, and Kakashi training every single day according to the 10-year anniversary guide. And that training, Guy also just implies that he and Kakashi are rivals, like in part 1, and then they can combo attack and react evenly against the Jinchuriki in the War Arc, with Guy just being, almost always confident in using the 6th gate, which is a power capable of propelling him to a full Sharingan Raikiri Kakashi, which would obviously be much faster than the disheveled Kakashi and potentially fatigued Kakashi who kept up with Hidan and raw movement speed without the Raikiri. And while Guy can match this Kakashi, he would actually be able to go even further beyond that with his 7th gate to be on a separate level, with attacks not even on the same level as the 6th gate counterpart, as demonstrated by him bombing Kisame with a Hirodora larger than the entire Turtle Island. And this is far overkill, as you could imagine, as Kakashi and then hence Guy, via virtue of being, Kakashi is literally stated to be the strongest ninja in Konoha, the top Jonin in Konoha, and the top jutsu master in Konoha, which is pretty consistent with his Anbu status. So by all means, Kakashi is the strongest Jonin in Konoha, likely in base, with Guy being a rival to this, likely in base, making them greater than Asuma, and a worse stylistic match, for Hidan than Asuma ever was. And then they have the Raikiri amp and the 6-gate amp on top of that, which is dozens of times of an increase, with Guy being able to go even further beyond that with more of an increase with the 7th gate. So Guy individually would just whoop Hidan pretty bad with his taijutsu, and he would probably just be blitzing Hidan, and Kakashi would just be able to cut his head off and blitz him with the Raikiri. So Kakashi and Guy stomp, both winning like 9 out of 10 times individually. Then, last but certainly not least, we have Killer B, and I didn't figure I had to talk about this one very long, as B is a rival to the Raikage, who again would be pretty much above virtually anyone else on this list below him, and he would also just be above base Kisame, who would actually be implied to be rivals with someone like Orochimaru, both characters being around a 3-Tomoe Itachi level, as that's the form Oro actually thinks about when admitting inferiority, which is consistent with how Itachi beat him with a 3-Tomoe Genjutsu, and Kisame is able to spar with Itachi in the game very evenly in 3-Tomoe, but immediately just kind of yields once the MS comes out, which would be pretty consistent. And in their manga as well, where Kisame was just having that arrogant attitude, but then switched up as soon as he saw the MS. This Kisame, and obviously Orochimaru, is just narratively far higher than the Konoha Jonin, as he goes on to fear hacks Kakashi terribly and battle Hiruzen on equal footing, according to the fanbook, who is just stated to be at the top of the world and the peak of the shinobi world, along with Kabuto, an underling of Orochimaru, who rivals Kakashi, just hyping Hiruzen up as well as the strongest Kage. Even for Kisame, without this relativity to Orochimaru, he's still a monster, as we are just never made aware if he got all of his chakra against Guy, and I wouldn't say so, as he was interrupted both times that when he was trying to fully recharge, and he just didn't have Samehada yet, and he actually could react equally to a 7th gate Might Guy, despite Guy having a less dense median to move through, being air, where Kisame had to move through water, and this would have just overpowered that Hirudora if it wasn't for the chakraless form. And then when you consider B may have fought a stronger Kisame, this is just detrimental for Hidan. In any case, with him just being able to outspeed and slam Kisame with his V2, with him also just that form ever only being pierced by fused Kisame's chakra absorbing blades. So this means that B would just beat the brakes off Hidan and could probably just fully transform and then Bijou bomb Hidan if he needed. So B just slams him back to tragedy of Hidan losing. But yeah, that's the video. Please, if you guys did enjoy it, then by all means consider liking and subscribing, as it seriously would help me out more than you'd probably realize. Or maybe just check out another one of my videos to see if you really do like the content. But please let me know more what you guys thought in the comments below, as I am really interested to hear your thoughts, as this has just been a topic of heavy request, not just on my channel but on many others. So I figured I'd step up and do it for you guys. So yeah, with that, please, thank you. Just thank you so much for all you guys' support. God bless you guys. Have a great day, and as always, love you guys.